Hello, I am back and I am going to read a continuation of Chapter 7, The Restless Decade. And we are talking about royal honors, and it's one of the duties that the royals do. And the description of royal honors is as follows. It says here that a fountain of honor in the UK, the sovereign has the sole right of conferring titles of honor on deserving people from all walks of life in public recognition of their merit, service, and bravery. So let's just briefly click on this. The royal family. Deny. See how this is. We see Charles, and he is handing an award. It's one of the duties that they do. As we can see, recipients collect their awards from a king or another member of the royal family at an investiture ceremony. Most honors are awarded on the advice of the Cabinet Office, and anybody can make a recommendation if they know someone they believe to be worthy. See the honors nomination. So, as you can see, honors recipients are announced twice a year, once in the New Year's honors list and once on the monarchy's official birthday. Separate military lists are published, known as the operational list, and cover military activities overseas. So, sometimes on the advice of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, honorary decorations are awarded to people who are neither British nor Commonwealth nationals, but have made a significant contribution to relations between the UK and their own country. This is known as an honorary reward. And in history, here we go. Throughout history, monarchs have been awarded those who have been shown service, loyalty, or gallantry with gifts of titles. After medieval times, physical gifts such as land or money were replaced by the awarding of knighthoods and the membership within the Order of Chivalry. Okay. The UK government evolved and Parliament's legislative role grew in the 18th and 19th centuries. The cabinet took over the role of selecting honors recipients. Until the beginning of the 19th century, only members of the aristocracy and high-ranking military figures could be appointed to an order of chivalry. But from then on, onwards appointed were drawn from a wider variety of backgrounds. In 1917, Queen Elizabeth's grandfather, George V, developed a new order of chivalry called the Order of British Empire, OBE. Okay, as a way of rewarding both men and women who had made an outstanding contribution to the World War I effort. Nowadays, the Order of the British Empire rewards service in a wider range of areas, from acting to charity work, with honors that include well-known MBE and OBE. And the list goes on. As you can see, you've got Order of the Garter, the oldest and most senior order of chivalry in Britain. It is limited to 24 members who are selected and appointed personally by the king. The Order of Thistles, 16 knights by personal gift of the king, the highest order of chivalry in Scotland. The Order of St. Patrick, the National Order of Ireland, this lapsed in 1974 with the death of the last surviving recipient. The Order of the British Empire, instituted in 1917 by George V to reward outstanding contribution to the war effort. This order now rewards people from all walks of life with well-known honors such as MBE and OBE. We see a lot of actresses that have that. They have an OBE. Here's one actress that I like. Her name is, see her in a lot of movies. We even see she's in a lot of movies. I see her with an OBE. You know, she's gotten a BAFTA award. She was in a lot of good movies and films in BritBox. Not just her, but Judi Dench. We love Judi Dench. So let's just show you Judi Dench. So, no, I think she's now called Dame Judi Dench. So she's got some sort of OBE or something like that. She's a very well established actress. She's played Queen Victoria many times. I think she's friends also with Camilla. But anyway, she has an OBE or something like that. So she's got a BAFTA award. So, but anyways, getting back to the whole honors list. It's just reward that the king gives out. Here, the order. The Order of Merit, the gift of sovereign to 24 members at any one time. This rewards those who have achieved greatly in the arts, learning, literature, and science. So we see that. There's the Queen in the middle. The Order of Bath, the Order of St. Michael and St. George, the Royal Victorian Order, the Royal Family Order. Okay, these are small portraits of the sovereign attached to a ribbon given to members of the royal family. So there's so many different types of honor, but that's what that is about. And I am going to read while we're reading about that. Just keep, okay. We can see there the king is awarding, in this picture, he's awarding most well-known honors is MBE, OBE, CBE, but there are a whole range of honors that the king awards in addition to these, such as Order of the Merit and Order of St. Michael and St. George. And he's providing, like, look at, he's giving her an award here for that, and everybody's here. So there is, we will get ready to read through this. Honors for sale. In the closing months of his reign, King George V told Ramsay MacDonald how well he understood the Prime Minister's reluctance to accept a title upon retirement. And he went on to say that if he himself were one of the new rich, the last thing he would want to do is run after a peerage. It was not that the king had lost faith in a hierarchical society, but that 25 years as he is the supposed fountain of honor. See, that's here, the fountain of honor, had left him disillusioned by the wiles and the extortion practiced in his name. The sale of honors to replenish party funds for their bestowal in return for political support is as old as parliamentary government itself. Stanley Baldwin used to recall with delight an 18th century document at Welbeck, home of the Dukes of Portland, a list of persons who had to be squared by the Prime Minister. One was to be given an Irish peerage, someone else a bishopric for his brother, a third a sinecure in the public service, and a fourth merely the gratification of a ducal handshake. Later, incumbents of Downing Street had expressed a distaste for such tariffs. Lord Salisbury, he badgered for peerages and places when forming his first administration in 1885. The experience has been a revelation to me of the baser side of human nature. And Asquith, compiling the coronation honors list of 1911, told Balfour that it was a task, as you well know, and uncongenial and even hateful as can fall to a man. Yet even the most high-minded of prime ministers came to realize that patronage is power. Like the Empress Maria Theresa, when invited to share in the partition of Poland, they wept, but they took. From the moment of his accession, the king tried to keep a restraining hand on both the size and content of the honors list. By ancient custom, the sovereign could, in theory, ennoble or otherwise reward a subject without ministerial advice. In 1912, when Sir Edward Grey was appointed a Knight of the Garter, Knowles insisted that Asquith's secretary should delete from the official announcement a phrase that the king had approved the award. He is supposed to be the fountain of honor. Knowles reminded Downing Street the king was correspondingly pleased whenever the recipient of an honor wrote to thank him for it, as the initiative had been his and not his government's. Soon after Sir James Craig, the first Prime Minister of Northern Ireland, had been gazetted as Viscountess Craigavon, Stanfordham replied to his letter of gratitude. I know it will be appreciated by His Majesty, as nowadays such expressions of thanks to the sovereign are the exception rather than the rule. In practice, there is no difference between the bestowal of an honor and any other act of government. Ministers proposed, and the sovereign gave his formal consent. It was, however, a field in which the king exercised his prerogative to the very limit. He held that an honor conferred in his name, and often by his hand, was too invested with the person of the sovereign to be left to an administrative abstraction known as the crown. His scrutiny of each proposed honor list was therefore painstakingly and critical. Even Asquith's submissions, more reputable than those of Lloyd George, were sometimes resisted. The king refused to elevate a proconsul form from an earl to a marquess, in view of his incompetency and of his being the laughingstock of everybody who has to do with him. To make a baronet of a liberal whose only apparent claim is that he is the brother of a postmaster general. To bestow a privy councillorship on a noted radical MB, on a noted radical MP, or to reward a member of the College of Arms, whom the king, Knowles explained, abominates. When Asquith stood firm, the king was obliged to give way. A dubious honor was not worth a constitutional crisis. Only the would-be Marquess had to wait for his promotion. Scattered through Asquith's peacetime list are names with little to recommend them for a high honor except money. Some have doubtless subscribed to Liberal Party funds, but they were neither so many or so unknown as to evoke public comment. With the war, however, there arose a breed of new men, industrialists and financiers whose services, as Curzon delicately put it, had not been wholly untinged by the expectation of social preferment to come. Some of these were accommodated by Asquith's Liberal administration and by the coalition over which he presided in 1915 to 1916. But it was not until Lloyd George had superseded him as Prime Minister that their aspirations were wholly fulfilled, and they were fulfilled at a price. In a manner unsuspected by Milton, time had run back and fetched the age of gold. Between 1917 and 1922, there were 4 aspects of the distribution of honors which increasingly disturbed the king. They were the failure of the Prime Minister to consult him before promising titles to certain political or financial supporters, the number of honors recommended by the Prime Minister, the character of the recipients, and the use of go-betweens to sell the royal prerogative in the marketplace. The most brazen example of Lloyd George's failure to consult the king in putting forward Sir Max Aitken for a peerage in December 1916, only 6 months after he had received a baronetcy. Sir Lloyd Beaverbrook, as he swiftly became, had already been told of his intended elevation. The king felt that he could not reject the Prime Minister's submission. But Stamfordham had told Lloyd George how surprised and hurt the king had been, and he continued, "His Majesty commands me to say that he feels that the sovereign's prerogative in this respect should not be disregarded, and he trusts that in the future no honors whatsoever will be offered by any minister until his approval has been informally obtained. His Majesty further asks that this may be made clear to your colleagues." That reference, "your colleagues," is significant. Bonar Law, as the senior conservatives in the coalition, was scarcely less nonchalant than Lloyd George in the matter of honors, particularly where some favor was owed to a subject of guardian origins. In April 1918, the king was again called upon to redeem a rash promise made by Lloyd George to another newspaper proprietor and member of the government. On the resignation of Lord Rothermere as Secretary of State for Air, the Prime Minister asked that he should be promoted from Baron to Viscount. This time there was resistance. Stamfordham told Lloyd George, "The king hopes you will not raise the question of Lord Rothermere's promotion in the peerage." The newly constituted Air Force, of which he was a minister, has been in existence 24 days when he resigns. Rightly or wrongly, his administration has been sharply criticized and is to be discussed in both the Houses of Parliament. He has only just been made a Privy Councillor, which in itself is a high distinction. A year later, Bonar Law repeated the request with disarming candor. I earnestly hope that this recommendation may be allowed to go through. I must point out to you that, while I fully realize the difficulties raised in your letter, the Prime Minister undertook at the time of Lord Rothermere's resignation that he would support this recommendation to the King, and the Prime Minister, I think, would personally be placed in a very unpleasant position if His Majesty could not see his way to accept the recommendation. Although some criticism may be passed upon the success or otherwise, his short administration at the Air Ministry has intense loyalty and assistance to the government during the later and critical days of the war, and also at the general election, have considerably increased the obligations due to him. Stanfordham had replied, His Majesty gives his approval, but with much reluctance. He cannot help but thinking that it would have been better if the Prime Minister had not given an undertaking to Lord Rothermere at a time of his resignation that he would be recommended to the King for promotion. This is another case of a quasi-promise, and, what is worse, a quasi-committal on behalf of His Majesty. During the first weeks of the reign, and again in 1911, the King had complained to Asquith of the size of the honors list. They grew no smaller with the years. Between Asquith's taking office in 1908 and his fall nearly 9 years later, 90 peerages were created, almost the same number as Lloyd George secured during his subsequent premiership of only 6 years. The ever-rolling stream of nobility affected the King's sense of humor. Soon after the death of the first Viscount Astor in 1919, the Times printed a facetious message from H.A.L. Fisher, President of the Board of Education, to the dead peer's daughter-in-law, Nancy. It began, I hate your being a Viscountess. The King was enraged. He told Stanfordham to write to the Prime Minister saying how willingly he would be to reduce the number of peerages. More than 100 new ones since 1910, and some created contrary to what would have been the King's personal wish. A cowed Downing Street replied that Fisher's message had been a private joke, not intended for publication. But by 1922, Stanfordham was writing with weary fatalism to Lord Salisbury. The whole question of honors grows more and more disagreeable and distasteful to the King, whose one object is to reduce the number that are submitted to him twice a year, but you will naturally be inclined to reply that His Majesty's efforts are not very successful. Even if Lloyd George's innumerable nominees had been deserving of a reward, the King would still have deplored such wholesale ennoblement, but their virtues were well concealed. As early in Lloyd George's premiership in March 1917, Salisbury and a band of like-minded conservatives were preaching the supreme importance of keeping our public life pure and free from reproach. It was, they pleaded, the one thing for a political party to reward its supporters, quite another to confer honors in return only for large contributions to party funds. When they expressed their disquiet in the House of Lords later that year, Curzon defended the practice with artful eloquence. People are rather apt, supposing they see in the newspaper that an honor has been conferred upon some person unknown to themselves to imagine that the honor has been bought. To be unknown to the public is not necessarily to be corrupt. Yet, as the soldier gives his valor or courage or genius, just as the artist gives his talents, just as the captain of industry gives his energy or enterprise, just as the man of science gives his inventions to the service of the state, so the wealthy man gives, and in my view is entirely justified in giving his wealth, which is very often his only asset, for the benefit of the country. Curzon's case was not entirely fanciful. Lord Lansdowne, the former Viceroy of India and former Secretary, spoke of the difficulty of drawing a line between legitimate and corrupt payments to the party funds. Asquith, too, another man of the utmost honor, insisted that contributions to party funds ought not in themselves to disqualify the donors from public recognition. Lloyd George went further. In private conversation with a conservative fund gatherer some years after ceasing to be prime minister, he commended the sale of honors as a wholesome element in British political life. You and I know perfectly well it is a far cleaner method of filling the party chest than the methods used in the United States or the Socialist Party. Here a man gives £40,000 to the party and gets a baronetcy. If he comes to the leader of the party and says, I subscribe largely to the party funds, you must do this or that, we can tell him to go to the devil. The king was prepared to tell any man to go to the devil, but saw no need to ennoble him first. He was equally enraged by Lloyd George's manipulation of the royal prerogative to secure the political support of the press. In 4 years, nearly 50 proprietors and editors have become privy councillors, peers, baronets, and knights. Beaverbrook, Rothmere, and Northcliffe, they were soon followed to the upper house by Sir Edward Russell, editor of the Liverpool Daily Post, and Sir George Riddle, the chief proprietor of the News of the World. The king objected to both. One, because he was past his 85th year. The other, because he'd been what was then known as the guilty party in a divorce case. Lloyd George, however, believed that neither age nor dalliance should deprive a customer of his coronet, and the king was obliged to give his consent. However excessive the fruits of journalism, they were dwarfed by the rewards which Lloyd George heaped on industry and finance. 26 peerages, 130 baronetcies, 481 knighthoods. Not all the recipients, of course, had subscribed to the funds of either of the two coalition parties, and of those who had subscribed, some would have qualified for honors by more conventional public service, or by giving their money to genuine charities. But any corrupt system must be judged by excesses. The king repeatedly tried to restrain Lloyd George from debasing the honors list with men of dubious qualifications or none. In 1921, for instance, he wrote to the Prime Minister about a Newcastle shipbuilder, a personally attractive character whose conviction for hoarding food during the war had proved no obstacle to his being made a baronet. But it was not until the summer of 1922 that the king, parliament, and public opinion united in condemnation of tainted honors. The list, published on 3 June 1922, to mark the king's birthday, contained the names of 5 new peers: Sir Robert Borwick, Sir Joseph Robinson, Sir William Vesty, Sir Samuel Waring, and Sir Archibald Williamson. Of these 5, only Borwick, a manufacturer of baking and custard powder, escaped public censure and derision when their elevation became known. Vesty's citation spoke of the immense wartime service he had rendered by placing his company's cold storage depot at the disposal of the government without charge. But during the parliamentary debates provoked by this honors list, the Secretary of State for War conceded that the Union Cold Storage Company had indeed been paid for the use of its warehouse at Le Havre and Boulogne. It also emerged that Vesty, in the evidence to the Royal Commission on Income Tax in 1919, had admitted moving his meat business to the Argentine Republic during the war in order to avoid British taxes. This maneuver was estimated to have cost the Treasury £3 million in taxes, and to have made between 3,000 and 5,000 British workers unemployed. Waring was accused in the Commons of having made a fortune out of wartime contracts for military equipment, yet to have abandoned all those shareholders who had lost their money by investing in an earlier company of his. As these charges were being uttered, the new peer shouted from the distinguished strangers' gallery, "This is a false statement." Williamson, who took the title of Lord Forrest, defended himself with equal vigor on the floor of the upper house. He was alleged to have pursued his South American interests in such a way as to infringe on wartime regulations against trading with the enemy. The Foreign Trade Department of the Foreign Office had been in no doubt that his company was sailing close to the wind. In its archives were a large dossier and a 12-page memorandum on the firm's activities prepared for the War Cabinet by Lord Robert Cecil, the Minister of the Blockade. The matter was referred to the Director of Public Prosecutions, Curzon's private secretary reported, and though they were not actually prosecuted, their licenses were withdrawn for a time. 3 days after he wrote again to the Foreign Secretary, the firm's record in the war was putrid, and they were told so by Sir E. Pollock, and the controller of the FTD. The record of the conversation exists together with the intercepted letters of the firm containing advice on trading with the enemy while keeping within the law, and a long series of FTD minutes of a scathing character. The writer, the future Lord Vansittart, could never resist a joke. "O tempora, O Forrest," he added. Lord Forrest may perhaps be given the benefit of the doubt. Sir Joseph Robinson neither deserved nor indeed sought such indulgence. The citation for his peerage described him as a chairman of the Robinson South African Banking Company. That bank, as it happened, had ceased to exist 17 years earlier. The company with which his name had been more closely associated was Randfontein Estates. As its chairman, he had bought mining freeholds in his own name, then sold them to the company at a hugely higher price without informing the shareholders. The deception led to protracted litigation in the South African courts, which eventually ordered him to pay £500,000 compensation. As recently as November 1921, Robinson's appeal to the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council had been dismissed. There could be no excuse for his name to appear in an honors list only 7 months later. Lloyd George was determined to ride the storm raised by Vestey, Waring, and Forrest Pierce. Robinson's record, however, was too black to defend. He must be persuaded to refuse the honor which had been announced but not yet officially gazetted. But when the emissary from the Downing Street arrived at Robinson's suite in the Savoy Hotel, the deaf old swindler misunderstood his visitor's mission. "How much more?" he said to have asked, reaching wearily for his checkbook. At length he agreed to write the Prime Minister a letter which could be read out in the House of Lords. It was both poignant and dignified. He declared that he had not sought a peerage, that at the age of 82 he had no desire for such things, and that he therefore begged His Majesty's permission to decline it. The king was not prepared to leave it at that. 4 days later, he wrote sternly to Lloyd George of his profound concern at the very disagreeable situation which has arisen on the question of honors. You'll remember that both in conversation and in written communication, I have deprecated the ever-increasing number of those submitted for the half-yearly Honors Gazette. And in recent years, there have been instances in which honors have been bestowed where subsequent information has betrayed a lack of care in the inquiries made as to the fitness of the persons selected for recognition. The case of Sir J.B. Robinson and all that it has evoked in the debates of the House of Lords and in the newspaper reports of interviews given him by press representatives must be regarded as little less than an insult to the Crown and to the House of Lords, and may, I fear, work inquiry to the prerogative in the public mind at home, and even more so in South Africa. I fully recognize that the inordinate demands upon your time make it impossible for you, in spite of your marvelous capacity for work, personally to investigate the claims and qualifications of those persons whose names you submit for my approval for honors and rewards. But I do appeal most strongly for the establishment of some efficient and trustworthy procedure in order to protect the Crown and the government from the possibility of similar painful, if not humiliating, incidents, the recurrence of which must inevitably constitute an evil, dangerous to the social and political well-being of state. Bowing to an outraged king, Parliament, and public, Lloyd George appointed a royal commission to advise on the procedure to be adopted in the future to assist the Prime Minister in making recommendations of names of persons deserving these special honors. Under the chairmanship of Lord Dunedin, a senior judge, it made 2 recommendations. First, a committee of 3 privy councillors, none of them members of government. They should be in the future able to scrutinize the records of all candidates for honors before their names are submitted to the sovereign. The second was that an act of parliament be passed imposing penalties both on those who promised to secure honors in return for payment and on those who promised payments in return for honors. One member of the Royal Commission remained unsatisfied. Arthur Henderson, the Labour MP, belonging to a party which had never had an honors list at its disposal, regretted that his colleagues had declined to inquire into previous transactions and to expose the names of both touts and customers in that unsavory trade. He also urged that never again should an honor be conferred for political services alone. Henderson, who deserved as a minister without portfolio in the War Cabinet, was to become Home Secretary in the first Labour government and Foreign Secretary in the second. He maintained his self-denying ordinance to the end. He died in 1935 as plain Arthur Henderson. 10 years later, his son, as staunch a Labour man as himself, consented to become one of almost 100 peers created by Clement Attlee between 1945 and 1951. Henderson's he had a disdain for political honors, he was needlessly austere. Okay, just a couple more pages left. The mere existence of the Political Honor Scrutiny Committee proposed by Dundine Commission ensures that a corrupt or otherwise unsuitable candidate does not even reach the Prime Minister's preliminary list, much less submitted to the sovereign. Yet the system is not infallible. An negligent or irresolute trio of privy councillors has occasionally failed to dissuade a prime minister from recklessly repaying friendship with honor. It is more difficult to measure the effectiveness of the Honors or Preventions and Abuses Act, another recommendation of the Dundine Commission. Since it reached the statute book in 1925, it has ensnared only one purveyor of honors and not a single paying customer. Others, however, may have been deterred by its penalties. Yet in March 1933, Baldwin told a friend, "I've got a scoundrel coming to see me who says he was promised a KCVO in return for £10,000 to a hospital. He is a member of my party, so I cannot refuse to see him. I shall tell him he is liable to be prosecuted for trafficking in honors." That anyone could hope to buy his way into the Royal Victorian Order, bestowed personally by the sovereign without ministerial advice, reveals both the gullibility of the ambitious and the extent to which touting continued even after the fall of Lloyd George. It was a familiar gambit of honors brokers to suggest that a donation to a hospital or other institution under royal patronage was a sure passport to a Buckingham Palace investiture. What remains surprising is that Baldwin's visitor was brazen enough to demand his illicit reward only a month after Mr. J. Maundy Gregory had become the sole and much publicized victim of the 1925 Honors Prevention and Abuses Act. Gregory, the son of a clergyman, was the most plausible and, at first, successful of the honors touts. Under guise of giving voluntary help to charitable organizations such as the Order of St. John of Jerusalem, he insinuated himself into their councils. then exploited the spurious repute which the connections brought him. He set up offices near the Houses of Parliament that to the uninitiated could pass for a government department of exceptional importance. He bought the Ambassador Club, where he would ostensibly entertain Lord Birkenhead and the exiled King George II of Hellenes. He even maintained a link with Buckingham Palace through his cultivation of Sir John Hanbury Williams, Marshal of the Diplomatic Corps, and thus a senior member of the royal household. Baldwin, Prime Minister in 1923 to 1924 and again in 1924 to 1929, insisted that any dabbling in honors necessary to raise funds for the Conservative Party should be conducted more discreetly than in the years of Lloyd George's coalition. For the Conservatives at that time had been no less active than their Liberal partners in the sale of honors, merely less successful in disposing of their wares and retaining the proceeds. One reform initiated by Baldwin was to stamp out the trade of the independent middleman such as Gregory. His friend J.C.C., later becoming Lord Davidson, chairman of the Conservative Party from 1926 to 1930, evolved an ingenious method of smashing the racket. He persuaded Mr. Albert Bennett, a rich Conservative MP and assistant treasurer of the party, to introduce himself to Gregory as a man well placed to supply honors. Once accepted by Gregory as a trusted agent, Bennett acquired the names of all his clients, which he then reported to Downing Street. This secret intelligence ensured that not a single name on Gregory's list should ever appear on an honors list. Since Gregory's trade depended on delivering the titles for which his clients had paid, his business collapsed. Although the king did not often plead for an honor to be conferred on an individual subject, he asked Baldwin on at least 6 occasions in 1926 and in 1927 to make Bennett a baronet. Possibly he repeated his request in subsequent years. The correspondence between Buckingham Palace and Downing Street on the subject is cryptic. "You are aware," Stanfordham wrote to Baldwin's private secretary, "of the circumstances in which the king is interested in Mr. Bennett. It is tempting to assume that the king knew and approved of his role as a spy and wished him to be rewarded for his enterprise. There is no evidence, however, to support such a conjecture. It seems more likely that Bennett, a noted philanthropist, had made a handsome contribution to a cause near to the king's heart. The king eventually had his way, and in Baldwin's resignation honors of 1929, Bennett emerged as Sir Albert." Gregory's arrest in 1933 on a charge of having offered to obtain a knighthood for a retired naval officer in return for £10,000 reveals how desperate he had become in his efforts to raise money. Not only did he have little prospect of securing a knighthood for his supposed client, he had chosen quite the wrong sort of victim. Lieutenant Commander E.W. Billiard Leake, DSO, an intimate friend of the Mountbattens and godfather to one of their daughters, needed no such social prop. He called in the police. The impending trial alarmed Baldwin, who, although still leader of the Conservative Party, had in 1931 agreed to serve as Lord President of the Council in Ramsay MacDonald's national government. For what if Gregory were to plead not guilty and reveal in the witness box his list of satisfied clients over the years? There would surely be conservatives as well as liberals among them. He must be silenced. And silenced he was, as Davidson left this account of the operation. Nobody knew what extent Maundy Gregory would betray his past in his desperation and financial stringency. We accordingly organized someone to go and to see him, who told him that he could not avoid a term of imprisonment. But if he kept silent, he could be pressured to bear on the authorities to let him live in France after his sentence has been served out. When this occurred, he was met at the prison gates by a friend of mine who drove him in a motor car to Dover, took him to France, ensconced him in previously arranged accommodations, gave him a sum of money, and promised him a quarterly pension on condition he never disclosed his identity or made any reference to the past. We kept him until the end. It has long been surmised that Gregory's silence was paid for those who had the most to fear from his revelations. That is not quite accurate. Some months after Gregory's release from Warwood Scrubs prison, Baldwin became the prime minister, with a cynical demand that would have astonished his contemporaries. He asked that Sir Julian Kahn, a sporting philanthropist who had been knighted 5 years earlier, should be made a baronet in return for paying off Maundy Gregory for £30,000. An agitated MacDonald recorded his conversation with Baldwin. He said that Maundy Gregory's papers and Maundy Gregory's presence here would stir up such a filthy sewer as would poison the public life. That many innocent persons had become indirectly involved, and that all parties were involved, I corrected him at once and said, "Not ours." He smiled and said that unfortunately friends of mine were, and I replied that if they were, I knew nothing about it. Then I remembered that Kleins and Henderson were mentioned at an earlier stage. The people like Winston Churchill, Austen Chamberlain, Birkenhead, they were involved, and that Gregory had been used by L.G. and Bonar Law, and that subscription lists for the rebuilding of St. George's Chapel at Windsor were involved, and several other things. Gregory, as indeed I know, was a blackguard who netted innocent people. The dunghill had to be cleared away without delay, and £30,000 was required to do it, so I had to give the honor. McDonald's held out for 6 months, then succumbed to renewed pressure from the conservative leader. "Mr. B involves me in a scandal," he complained in his diary on 19 May 1934, "by forcing me to give an honor because a man has paid £30,000 to get Tory headquarters and some Tories, living and dead, out of a mess." In the following month, Kahn became a baronet. Lloyd George was not the only prime minister of King George V to muddy the fountain of honors. And that is the end of that topic, honors for sale. And we will go on to the next topic, which is honors not for sale. And I will take a break and read that in a different episode. so that you can take a break in listening. But that is very interesting. So just so wanted to bring this up if I can find it. But at any rate, look, we are now realizing after reading through King George V that really, as with King George VI, as with Queen Elizabeth, the sovereign he's kind of trapped. I mean, he's not actually ruling the country. He doesn't have a lot of decisive powers. He just advises, he guides, he warns, he gets informed by the prime minister and the parliament as to what's going on. He rules through the parliament. He has again, this is a constitutional monarchy. It is not an absolute monarchy. And it's probably why the monarchy survived when all the other monarchies were falling away. Remember, Russia, Tsar Nicholas had died and his family was assassinated, but prior to that, Tsar Nicholas had to abdicate his monarchy. And Kaiser Wilhelm, his monarchy did not survive. So a lot of the monarchies were falling away. Habsburg Empire was falling away. So many empires, so many empires and so many monarchies were not surviving. And as we can tell in reading about King George, he didn't get a lot of say so, you know, in how things went. So that's the way it goes. So we'll read the next episode in about honors not for sale, and I hope if anybody's interested, you'll see me as we learn more about that. Thank you for listening and have a nice day.